Welcome, wanderer of the late hour. You've tuned in to Whispers of History, the place where cobwebs of the past unravel slowly, quietly, and with just enough sarcasm to keep the dreams interesting. If you're here to relax, learn, or simply forget about tomorrow's to-do list, you're in very strange but very good company. So before your eyelids begin their slow descent, do us a gentle favor. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and whisper in the comments where you're listening from, and what time the Sandman found you tonight. Now take a deep breath. Let the day slide off your shoulders like a linen tunic in the desert breeze. The sky is deep indigo, the Nile ripples like silk under starlight, and there's a faint scent of roasted barley and sweet myrrh in the air. You're not in Kansas anymore. You're in Memphis, not the one with guitars, the one with crocodiles and a surprisingly robust dental industry. A fair warning, you probably won't make it through this day, and that's perfectly fine. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You begin by walking along a dusty track, warm sand shifting beneath your sandals, past reed huts and homes whose rooftops are covered with sleeping cats. The river is waking up before the people, birds flit low over the water, and somewhere someone's donkey is deeply unhappy about something. The year is, well, historians don't entirely agree. Somewhere between 2700 and 2400 BCE, give or take a millennium. That's the thing with ancient Egyptian dates, they're as wobbly as a half-chiseled obelisk. Still, you're not here for the accuracy. You're here because you have a toothache. And in this particular reality, you've heard tell of a man down by the embalmer's quarter, a healer of the mouth, a man who knows onions in ways you cannot yet imagine. You pass a limestone wall covered in faded red drawings. They depict a smiling man prying open another man's mouth, while three scribes nearby record something very important, probably which incantation to mumble and how many cloves of garlic were involved. You start to feel hopeful and vaguely alarmed. A child runs past you holding a frog. Standard behavior. As you round the corner near the Temple of Ptah, who is quite possibly watching this whole scene unfold with divine indifference, you see it. A wooden sign hanging from a palm thatch awning. It reads in hieroglyphs something like, "The one who calms the biting god inside your teeth." And standing beneath it is a man with hands stained orange, probably from too much onion poultice. His name is Ra. He smiles widely, suspiciously widely for someone in a world with no modern floss, and beckons you forward. "Come in," he says, motioning toward a shaded room filled with baskets. Baskets of what appear to be herbs, sticks, tiny bronze tools, and yes, heaps and heaps of onions. The fun fact, Egypt had one of the world's earliest known dentists, and his name was coincidentally also Ra. Whether or not he actually cured anything is up for debate, but he did leave behind a tomb calling him Chief of Dentists and Physicians, which is the kind of LinkedIn title we should all aspire to. As you sit, he peers into your mouth, he hums. He pokes something gently with a stick dipped in honey and sycamore sap. Then he says something like, "You've got a worm." You blink, you try not to move. Did he say worms? Yes, welcome to the earliest known dental theory. Tiny invisible demons that bore holes in your teeth and shriek at inconvenient times. The cure? Burn them out, or drown them in sour beer, or scare them off with incantations. Or, you guessed it, onion paste. The healer begins to mash together a blend of onion, cumin, frankincense, and why not, a pinch of powdered crocodile dung. You try not to make eye contact. He chants softly. You try not to interpret the phrase, "May the serpent of pain flee your jaws." And then, very slowly, he begins to apply the paste. It burns, it tingles, it smells like soup gone wrong. And as the sky lightens just a little outside, you wonder if perhaps the worm has already packed its bags. Historians still debate whether any of this actually worked, or if people just got used to the pain and called it a win. But one thing's certain. Ancient Egyptian dentists were not playing around. You lean back, you inhale onion, ash, and the slow trickle of Nile wind. Somewhere in the distance, a crocodile yawns. You begin to feel something. Maybe better, maybe not. But definitely sleepy. You spend the night in a cool, dark corner of the healer's home. He insists it's tradition to let the paste dream with you, whatever that means. The pillow is a stone block, not metaphorically, a literal carved headrest. Egyptians believed it elevated the head to allow dreams to pass between this world and the next. Your neck disagrees. But by morning, you feel something resembling relief. Or maybe it's just resignation. Though the healer hands you a papyrus slip, inked with symbols that, if you squint, might say, "Return in 3 days for the next treatment and bring onions." Classic upsell. You exit into a narrow alley where the marketplace is just beginning to wake. Women with gold-threaded braids arrange lotus flowers in reed baskets. A boy tries to trade a dead fish for a charm shaped like a hippo. And near the temple steps, a priest is loudly explaining that Ra probably doesn't care if your sandals match. As you wander, a merchant offers you something suspiciously chewy and wrapped in a leaf. You accept it. You regret it instantly. It's called cake and it's made of barley, honey, and crushed locusts. Full of protein, full of regret. A obscure fact of the day. Some tombs include jars labeled for mouth pain filled with date wine and bits of fermented bread. Basically, early Egyptian Listerine. Fermentation was their answer to everything from toothaches to heartbreak. As a cat brushes past your ankle, it gives you a look that says, "Even I wouldn't eat that cake." You wander to the banks of the Nile. A procession of scribes in white linen walk past you, heading to the House of Life, a place of healing, magic, and, well, paperwork. Most of what we know about ancient Egyptian medicine comes from scrolls housed in places like that. They wrote down everything. Remedies, prayers, wildly optimistic diagnoses. One famous scroll, the Smith Papyrus, suggests pushing broken bones back into place and covering wounds with raw meat. Modern doctors wince. Ancient ones nodded wisely and hoped for the best. You see a man rubbing garlic on his feet while reciting a spell. His neighbor is eating clay. Both claim it helps with headaches. You start to suspect Egypt was the original wellness influencer. As midday heat thickens, you duck into a shadowed courtyard. The walls are painted with scenes of gods handing herbs to kings and kings handing them to absolutely everyone else. One shows Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, giving a particularly smug side-eye while holding a bundle of mint. A quiet breeze stirs the date palms. A child naps in a basket, mouth open, one onion slice balanced delicately on his chin. You think about the healer, his confidence, his onion stash. You wonder how many he's chased away over the years, and whether they ever came back out of spite. The sun shifts, warm and drowsy. You yawn, so does a donkey. It might be time for another nap, or another treatment, or both. You lie down beneath a fig tree. The ground is dry, but the air hums with bees and the smell of crushed herbs. The sleep pulls at your thoughts like the current of the river. Tomorrow, you'll learn about copper tools and what happens when someone tries to drill into a molar with no anesthesia. But not now. Now you close your eyes. And the onion dreams begin again. You wake to the sound of a heron cackling. It sounds like a goat in distress, or a priest who stubbed his toe mid-sermon. Either way, it's enough to rouse you from a dream where a giant onion had been lecturing you about proper flossing. The fig tree still casts its shadow, now short and twitching in the wind. The Nile smells greener today, thick with the scent of wet reeds and boat tar. Fishermen call to one another across the water in a sing-song rhythm older than most of the pyramids. Your mouth feels not perfect but manageable. There's a dull throb where the paste had burned the night before, but no worm seems to be screaming today. You sit up and stretch, watching a small funeral procession float past. The boat is painted in bright, with the deceased lying in a woven linen wrap, surrounded by jars, amulets, and one perfectly ripe pomegranate. Egyptians didn't believe in traveling light even after death. Now, there's no rush here. The day unfolds like parchment, slowly with a bit of flacking at the corners. You wander into the city's artisan quarter, where men and women carve ivory, paint furniture, and occasionally argue about whether Horus or Bastet makes the better talisman for hair loss. You stop at a booth covered in gleaming bronze instruments. Hooks, needles, flat discs, tiny chisels, curved scrapers. They shimmer in the light like jewelry, but your jaw clenches when you realize what they're for. Copper tools, the foundation of ancient Egyptian dental procedures. Used for everything from extracting teeth to lancing abscesses, these tools were surprisingly advanced and terrifying. Imagine someone approaching your mouth with a tiny bronze dagger saying, "This'll just pinch a little." But here's the kicker. They sterilized them with fire and wine. Some even claim priests would whisper spells over them. modern dentists settle for humming playlists. You try not to wince as a man demonstrates a tooth extraction technique on a dried-out goat skull. He smiles proudly. You retreat slightly. An obscure tidbit of the day, some Egyptian teeth were found with turquoise inlays. Yes, decorative fillings. Apparently, dental bling wasn't invented in the 2000s. It just smelled more like camel fat and incense. And historians still debate whether these inlays were functional, ornamental, or simply something done to corpses for their journey into the afterlife. Either way, it's hard to floss turquoise. Nearby, a woman grinds something in a stone bowl. You ask what it is. She replies, charred bread and donkey milk. It strengthens the gums. You nod solemnly, of course it does. A scribe passes by, laughing at a papyrus scroll as if it's this season's best gossip. It probably is. You catch a glimpse of the hieroglyphs. It's a satirical poem about a dentist whose breath was worse than his patient's teeth. Though the street's narrow, the sun hovers overhead like a judgmental god. You duck into another courtyard. This one has a fountain shaped like a lotus gently burbling. Children splash their hands in it. A cat naps on the rim. Someone has placed a small copper toothpick on a stone nearby as an offering or maybe a prank. While you sit, you breathe. And you begin to realize, beneath all the ritual, the incense, and the truly heroic use of onions, these were people trying to solve the same annoying problem. How to stop the ache in a mouth when there are no pills, no x-rays, just bronze tools, clay jars, and a whole lot of hope. While the wind shifts, you close your eyes for just a moment. But your story isn't done. The next morning begins with a gift. Not gold, not grain, but something arguably better, a pomegranate with only a few bite marks in it. You thank the elderly woman who hands it to you. She says nothing, just nods with the solemn dignity of someone who has absolutely no time for dental nonsense today. You wander toward the riverbank again. Today's plan is ambitious. Ra wants to try something called a poultice compression ritual, which, by the tone of his voice, could either save your jaw or turn your cheek into a bread oven. But before you return to him, curiosity takes you elsewhere. Specifically, to the Temple of Anubis, where embalming priests are rumored to moonlight as surgeons. You're not sure if that's a comfort or a concern. You step inside. The air smells of resin and salt. Long papyrus scrolls hang from the walls, some depicting human anatomy with shocking accuracy. Rib cages, livers, jawbones. One drawing shows a figure with an open mouth, a thread pulled through it. You assume it's some kind of stitching technique or possibly the earliest orthodontics. The priest greets you with a slow nod. His hands are stained with natron and something that may have once been a hyena. He offers you a seat beside a stone table that has seen too many centuries and possibly too many molars. He explains that, yes, embalmers often had the best knowledge of the human body, including the teeth. After all, when you open enough skulls, patterns emerge. Like this guy chewed too much barley, or this lady needed a better toothbrush. Major fact of the day, ancient Egyptians didn't have refined flour, so their bread often included bits of stone from grinding tools. This meant even their priests had worn down molars by middle age. Basically, their food fought back. As the priest continues, he casually mentions using crushed malachite for numbing, or vision-enhancing, depending on the dosage. You nod cautiously, hallucinogenic dental treatments. Sure, why not? An obscure tidbit, the Book of the Dead includes a line where the soul in the afterlife begs for teeth that do not chatter. Apparently, dental anxiety follows you into eternity. The priest offers you a small charm, a piece of clay shaped like a molar. For protection, he says. You slip it into your satchel, right next to your emergency onion. As you leave, you notice a statue of Anubis smiling just slightly. It's either the light or the statue knows how many teeth you've left behind. Back at Ra's clinic, you lie down on the reed mat once more. The poultice smells sharper today. He mutters something about improved fermentation. That can't be good. He presses it to your jaw, wraps your head in linen, and ties it snug. You now look like someone who lost a bet with a mummy. But here's the surprising part. It helps. The ache dulls, your muscles loosen. The onion heat fades into something almost soothing. You hear voices outside, kids playing a game involving sandals and shouting. The Nile laps softly in the distance. A breeze pushes through the papyrus blinds. And you rest. Because for now, the worm is silent. And sleep, it seems, is near. The sun climbs slow and stubborn today, like it has something to prove. You lie beneath the same reed ceiling, linen wrap still snug around your head, your jaw pulsing with that strange onion warmth, somewhere between remedy and revenge. Ra hums quietly as he arranges his tools. Bronze scrapers glint like small moons in the low morning light. He wipes each one with a cloth soaked in wine and something vaguely mossy. For purity, he explains, and aroma. You decide not to press further. Today is inspection day. He wants to see what's changed, what's healed, and what still smells like the serpent. You're not sure if that's a dental diagnosis or a metaphor. It's always hard to tell. He removes the wrap, peers into your mouth, and nods with satisfaction. Less red, he says, less angry. That's one way to describe inflammation. He asks if you've had dreams. You tell him yes about onions and talking crocodiles and a goose that scolded you for poor brushing technique. He claps his hands. That's a good sign. And here's today's historical nugget. Ancient Egyptians believed dreams held healing power. Some temples even offered dream healing chambers, where patients would sleep near sacred statues, hoping the gods would whisper cures in their sleep. Imagine getting your wisdom teeth removed and Osiris drops in for a therapy session. Meanwhile, Ra is mixing a new batch of salve. This one includes ground dates, powdered myrrh, and surprise onion again. You're starting to think onions were the ancient version of duct tape. An obscure tidbit, some spells specifically mention releasing the demon of the mouth, usually involving spitting into a jar and burying it beneath a fig tree. There are worse therapies. Modern ones just cost more. As dabs the paste onto your gums with a tiny reed brush, he tells you about a patient who once claimed his molar had been cursed by a jealous neighbor. So Ra performed a full ritual involving smoke, chanting, and a goat's sneeze. He felt better, says, or at least distracted. Historians still debate whether these rituals were believed literally or symbolically. But honestly, if someone waved smoke and said it would fix your toothache and it worked, you wouldn't argue either. The room is quiet. His wife brings in a small bowl of barley broth and smiles politely. She has teeth like pearls. Probably knows where he hides the good herbs. You eat slowly. The broth is warm and simple, tasting of cumin and river salt. And maybe less pain now. You breathe in deeply. The clinic smells of warm earth, boiled mint, and sleep. And for a moment, you don't miss home. You don't miss answers. You just rest, surrounded by the quiet hum of an ancient profession and the last traces of exorcism. Later that day, you decide to stretch your legs, or at least get away from the onions for a while. The air outside is thick and buzzing, full of flies and gossip. A group of boys race clay boats in a puddle left by the morning's irrigation. One of them is chewing on sugar cane, grinning through crooked, half-grown teeth. Future clientele for Ra. You follow the road that skirts the river, watching barges drift lazily downstream. A priest chants from a raft piled with papyrus, occasionally stopping to scold a bird. You nod in approval. Some birds deserve it. As you wander, you come across a man sitting cross-legged on a mat, offering tooth oils too. His display is impressive. 10 small flasks, each filled with something shinier or smellier than the last. You stop to investigate. He claims to be a wandering mouth seer, which sounds either deeply spiritual or profoundly made up. His oils, he says, come from sacred groves, foreign lands, and one mysterious camel. You pick up a vial labeled Seth, whisper. It smells like mint, despair, and something flammable. He insists it's for tooth strength and banishing snakes. You politely return it. A historical fact, many Egyptians used mouthwashes made from vinegar, honey, and crushed herbs. They didn't just swish, they gargled with prayers. Oral hygiene was surprisingly important, even when the tools looked like medieval torture devices. You buy a small chunk of cleansing resin just to be polite. The man bows so dramatically you worry he'll fall into the Nile. Of obscure fact, some tombs include instructions for afterlife dental care. One famously featured a spell to ensure the mouth opens painlessly when speaking to Osiris. That's commitment. Historians still debate whether this was a metaphor for honesty or a literal request to avoid ghost cavities. Either way, someone in ancient Thebes was definitely stressing about their afterlife dental exam. You wander into a shady grove of tamarisk trees, birds chirping lazily above. A woman nearby sings a lullaby while stirring something in a clay pot. It smells of cloves and honey. She offers you a taste. You accept. It's sweet, spiced, and oddly numbing. She grins. Good for bobbies, she says, and travelers who ask too many questions. While you take the hint, you sit by the water's edge, watching lotus blossoms drift along the current. A heron stands on one leg like a very serious yoga instructor. Now your jaw feels better, not perfect, but better. Maybe it's the clove syrup. Maybe it's the priest. Maybe it's just time doing what time does. Now the sun begins to lower itself behind the palm trees. You lie back on the riverbank, eyes half closed, letting the last of the day drift through you like the slow turn of the Nile. And tomorrow there will be more remedies, more rituals, possibly more goat-based surprises. But for now, there is only this. A soft jaw, a sleepy sky, and the gentle knowledge that someone somewhere just invented toothpaste by accident. You wake to birds arguing above your head. They're loud, wing-flapping, ancient Egyptian ibis birds, white-feathered, sharp-beaked, and highly opinionated, probably discussing your molars. Your back is damp with morning dew. The Nile has crept a little closer overnight, and the air smells like wet papyrus and distant honey. You sit up slowly. The jaw aches less now. It's no longer the central character in your personal tragedy, just a background actor occasionally demanding attention. You stretch, bones cracking in ways that would make even the gods wince. Then you remember what Ra said before you left yesterday. Come back today, we try the tooth threading. You're not sure what that is, but it sounds like embroidery, which is fine if it's done on cloth, not on your face. Still, you're a polite traveler, and also mildly curious. The walk to clinic takes you past a street of musicians, reed flutes and hand drums with rhythms older than most empires. A woman sings a song about a lost fish and a boy who tried to marry a goddess. The chorus includes exaggerated toothy grins. Coincidence? Probably not. You pass a public scribe surrounded by clay tablets, one of which reads, "He bit the bread and screamed at the gods." Another dental testimonial, no doubt. As at the clinic greets you with enthusiasm and a thin cord of linen soaked in oil, you look at it, then at him, then back at the cord. He explains that tooth threading is meant to loosen bad spirits lodged between the teeth, or possibly just plaque. He's a little fuzzy on the translation. Of historical fact, ancient Egyptians used frayed twigs and linen threads for early dental flossing. It wasn't minty, it wasn't convenient, but it probably helped a bit. An obscure tidbit: in one medical papyrus there's mention of whispering into the thread before using it. The idea was to transfer intent, your desire for healing, into the tool itself. That's what we call vibes-based medicine. While you lie back on the mat, begins. He murmurs something soft, half prayer, half poem, and gently threads the linen between your teeth. It's awkward, a little ticklish. surprisingly intimate in the way only ancient oral hygiene can be. And as he works, you notice the walls of his clinic again. The drawings of open mouths, of herbs being handed down by gods, of teeth shaped like tiny pyramids. You realize dentistry wasn't just a profession, it was part of their theology. Clean mouth, clean soul. Now, historians still debate whether Ra was the first real dentist or just a very ambitious priest with a passion for molars. Either way, his legacy sticks, quite literally. You leave with a fresh wrap around your head, a sprig of mint tucked behind your ear, and a vague sense of spiritual cleanliness. There's also the taste of olive oil and myrrh in your mouth. Not bad, could be worse. Could be crocodile dung again. It's midday now, and the heat makes everything move in slow motion. People, animals, even time itself. The streets shimmer with sunlight bouncing off limestone walls. Flies circle like philosophers with nowhere to go. You sit beneath an awning near the market, chewing slowly on a piece of honeyed bread. It's dense, dry, and filled with tiny pebbles. Standard Egyptian snack. Tastes like history and possibly gravel. As across from you, a boy sells bundles of herbs. You hear him shout, pepper for the tongue, mint for the mouth, dill for the god who won't stop complaining. A woman walks by holding a small clay idol. She kisses it gently, then tucks it into a pouch hanging over her chest. You squint and realize it's a tiny model of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and plague. You wonder if she's also the patron of gingivitis. Then someone calls your name, sort of. It's Ra, and he's waving excitedly from across the square. You pretend not to see him for a moment, but the man has excellent eyesight and terrible patience. He rushes over with a scroll. I found something, he says, from the House of Life. He unrolls it and points to a passage halfway down, a spell for the cracked tooth and weeping jaw. You read slowly. It includes phrases like bind with crocodile spit and invoke the laughter of Hathor. You nod thoughtfully, sure, why not? The historical fact of the day. Egyptian physicians were required to memorize vast collections of remedies and magical incantations. Medical training included both anatomy and theology. Diagnosing a sore tooth, you needed both a good eye and a decent singing voice. Explains that this new treatment involves heat, and music and beeswax. You follow him to a side room you hadn't seen before. It's warm and smells like melting honey. In the center is a small fire, over which a bronze dish slowly heats a lump of pale yellow wax. Beeswax, he says, to seal the crack. An obscure tidbit, ancient Egyptian dentists did try to fill cavities with a mixture of resin, beeswax, and sometimes powdered precious stones. Functional, questionable, fabulous, absolutely. You lie down again. He takes a tiny bronze spoon, scoops the warm wax, and gently presses it into a small hollow near your molar. It doesn't hurt. It's oddly satisfying, like patching a hole in an old boat you didn't realize was leaking. He hums softly, a melody that repeats every 4 beats. You assume it's part of the spell, or maybe he's just trying to stay awake. Historians still debate how often these wax fillings worked. But in at least one case, a mummy was found with a beeswax plug still in place 2,500 years later. Not bad for ancient tech. You rinse your mouth with herbal wine, spit into a jar shaped like a frog. Standard procedure. Then as the wax sets and the air cools, you feel a strange sense of peace. You've survived tooth threading, incense rituals, crocodile lore, and now dental candle making. You smile a real smile. It only hurts a little. And in this world of pharaohs, gods, and grain taxes, that feels like a small, sacred victory. It's the cool part of the day now, the desert's soft apology for the sun's earlier aggression. You find yourself back at the river's edge, sandals off, feet dangling lazily in the Nile. Somewhere upstream, someone's playing a flute. The melody wanders like a drunk ibis looking for a fish stand. Your jaw feels lighter, not healed exactly but less vengeful. You bite into a fig without flinching. Progress. As a fisherman nearby pulls in his net and mutters something about fish with bad teeth. You wonder if that's a joke or just an unusual complaint. He offers you a small perch anyway. You decline gently. Not tonight, tonight for thinking. You think about all the rituals. The fire, the wax, the prayers, the herbs. And here's today's major historical fact. Egyptian medicine, for all its spiritual flair, was surprisingly empirical. There are recorded cases of setting broken bones, diagnosing diabetes through taste, don't ask, and performing surgical procedures that would make a modern doctor pause, then slowly back away. You lean against a sun-warmed rock. A child walks past singing to a goat. The goat looks unimpressed. An obscure tidbit. Some wealthier Egyptians had dedicated tooth servants whose job was to carry tools and apply ointments. It's unclear if they were skilled assistants or glorified toothpaste caddies, but either way, it's the kind of luxury that says, I eat a lot of grain and fear the consequences. Historians still debate whether Ra's techniques were passed down through formal apprenticeships or just absorbed by osmosis from listening to people scream in adjacent rooms. A reed boat glides past, carrying bundles of onions, no doubt destined for someone else's afflicted gums. The cycle continues. You close your eyes and think about your own teeth, not as enemies now, but as tiny, slightly tragic survivors. You're tired, but it's the good kind of tired. The kind that comes from being poked, prodded, whispered at, and ultimately left more or less intact. A breeze stirs the river. And in the distance, you think you hear Ross singing again. You're back in the city center now, moving through the streets as if you belong here, which, in a way, you do. You've become something of a regular at the market. The bread seller recognizes you and offers you a softer loaf this time. It still contains gravel, but less gravel. Progress again. You pass by a pottery shop where someone sculpted a jug in the shape of an open mouth. You consider buying it, then remember you've spent all your coins on beeswax and prayers. A scribe calls out from under a canopy, offering to write your dental journey in 20 lines of poetic hieroglyphs. You're flattered, but unconvinced that onions, wax, and tears will make a good title. Today's goal is preventative care. Ra's idea, not yours. You find him sitting cross-legged in his courtyard, grinding herbs with exaggerated seriousness. He's mixed something new, powdered acacia bark, mint, and, yes, more onion, but this time it's powdered and charred, less tear-inducing. This is for daily chewing, he says, handing you a small cloth pouch. Keeps the mouth strong, keeps the spirits away. While you chew it, it tastes like burnt forest floor. He beams with pride. Here's your fact for today. Acacia resin, used often in ancient Egyptian oral hygiene, contains antibacterial properties. It was their version of mouthwash without the minty freshness or televised sparkle. An obscure tidbit, some Egyptians believed that spitting after chewing herbs could cleanse not just the mouth but the soul. Ritual expectoration, if you will. You're unsure whether to feel purified or just slightly embarrassed. Historians still debate whether these herbal blends were primarily medicinal or just socially accepted breath fresheners. Given the communal closeness of Nile side life, either purpose was probably welcome. You spend the rest of the day helping Ra gather ingredients. You carry jars of honey. He explains the spiritual significance of each plant with the tone of a man who deeply believes, or at least hopes you do. And at sunset, he gives you a reed basket filled with tools, salves, and a tiny amulet shaped like a tooth. In case you go far, he says, and the worm follows. You thank him, he nods solemnly. The man who chased a pain from your jaw with fire, linen, and onion dust deserves that much. As night falls, you sit beneath the stars with your basket, chewing the last of the acacia blend. The Nile laps nearby, the city quiets. The stars come out slow like teeth behind a curtain of cloud. And you sleep knowing that tomorrow you'll learn how to make your own toothbrush from a twig. Have you ever wandered into the woods thinking it was just another peaceful escape, only to feel like something or someone was following you? What if I told you that some forests aren't just made of trees, but of dark secrets that you might never escape? Tonight, we're taking you deep into the woods where the trees aren't the only things that grow. In tonight's collection of spine-chilling forest tales, we dive into the heart of nature's most eerie and mysterious places. From whispering trees to ancient creatures lurking beneath the roots, these stories will make you question whether it's safe to venture into the wilderness at all. So sit back, but keep your eyes open, because once you hear these stories, you'll never look at the forest the same way again. Story 1. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. Rachel and her boyfriend, Chris, had been working nonstop for months, and they needed a break, a chance to reconnect with nature, escape the demands of their busy lives, and clear their minds. After a few weeks of searching, they found an isolated cabin deep in the woods, far from the nearest town. It was an old hunting lodge nestled between towering trees with a small stream running nearby. The pictures online looked serene, offering a peaceful and quiet retreat. The promise of complete solitude was too good to resist. Rachel wasn't one for the outdoors, but Chris loved hiking and nature walks, so she agreed, excited to experience something new. They packed their bags, filled the car with supplies, and drove for hours, leaving the city behind. The further they went, the more remote the area became. Eventually, they turned onto a dirt road, winding between ancient trees that seemed to reach for the sky, their branches heavy with the weight of time. By the time they arrived at the cabin, dusk had settled over the forest. The cabin stood in perfect isolation, surrounded by thick woods, and as the last light of day faded, a sense of eerie quiet crept in. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the wind and the distant call of night creatures. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Rachel glanced at Chris, who smiled and handed her the keys. "This place is amazing, huh?" he said. "It's beautiful," she replied, though there was a hint of unease in her voice. She wasn't used to being so far away from everything, surrounded by nothing but trees. But Chris was already unloading the car, and she followed suit, trying to push aside the strange feeling gnawing at her gut. The cabin had an old charm, furniture that looked as though it had been around for generations, the walls adorned with mounted antlers and a large stone fireplace that looked ready for a fire. They set up for the night, lighting candles and getting comfortable. As they sat down to eat a simple meal of pasta, the darkness outside pressed in. The wind howled through the trees and Rachel shivered even though the cabin was warm. As after dinner, Chris suggested they take a short walk around the property. "Let's explore a little. We're not here to sit inside all weekend, right?" he grinned. Rachel hesitated but agreed, not wanting to seem overly cautious. They grabbed their jackets and stepped outside, their feet crunching on the gravel path leading through the woods behind the cabin. At first, the walk was calm, with only the soft sounds of the forest accompanying them. The moonlight filtered through the canopy of trees, casting long shadows on the ground. Rachel walked close to Chris, trying to ignore the feeling that the trees were watching her, their branches shifting in the wind like gnarled hands. As they made their way deeper into the forest, the path narrow and overgrown. The further they went, the darker it seemed, the moonlight barely penetrating the thick canopy. Rachel's breath grew shallow, and she found herself glancing over her shoulder as if expecting something to be there. But when she looked, nothing was. "Are you okay?" Chris asked, noticing her sudden change in demeanor. "Yeah, just a little weirded out. It's so quiet here," Rachel replied, forcing a smile. And Chris laughed. "You're not scared of a few trees, are you?" "No, of course not," Rachel said quickly, but the feeling of unease didn't go away. It was as if the forest itself was alive, breathing, waiting. Suddenly, Rachel stopped. She could have sworn she heard something, a faint whisper carried by the wind. She turned to Chris, her face pale. "Oh, you hear that?" she whispered. Chris paused and listened, but all he could hear was the wind and the rustling of leaves. "I don't hear anything, it's just the trees." But Rachel was certain. The whisper wasn't just the wind, it was a voice in the trees. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She glanced at the towering trunks of the ancient trees around them, their limbs stretching toward the sky like they were trying to touch the stars. It felt like they were closing in on them. "Let's go back to the cabin," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Chris, though not feeling the same anxiety, agreed, and they turned around, heading back toward the cabin. But as they walked, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. The whispering started again, louder this time. It was a soft, indistinct murmur, like the trees themselves were speaking, calling out to them. Rachel's pace quickened, but it felt like the woods were growing denser, the shadows deeper. She could feel her heart racing, and the air grew heavier with each step. As they reached the edge of the trees, Rachel spun around, convinced she had seen something moving in the woods just at the edge of the trees. Chris laughed nervously. "It's just your imagination," he said, trying to reassure her. "Let's get inside." They hurried back to the cabin, locking the door behind them. Chris went to the fire and stoked it, while Rachel sat down at the table, still feeling uneasy. Her eyes kept darting to the window where the dark forest loomed just beyond the light's reach. It was silent again, but it felt oppressive, suffocating. That night they tried to sleep, but neither of them could shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of the wind in the trees felt like it was carrying something malevolent. Rachel kept hearing the whispering voices again, but this time they seemed to come from inside the cabin, echoing in the dark corners of the room. The next morning, Rachel tried to brush it off as nerves, but as they sat down for breakfast, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread. Something wasn't right. Chris, oblivious to her concerns, suggested they go for another walk in the woods. "Maybe we can find the source of the weird noises," he said, trying to make light of it. Reluctantly, Rachel agreed, and they ventured back into the woods. The trees seemed even more imposing in the daylight, their trunks twisted and gnarled. The whispers began again, faint at first but growing louder the further they walked. This time, Rachel could hear words, snippets of sentences, but they were distorted, impossible to understand. She felt her skin crawl. Suddenly, they came upon a clearing, a patch of land where the trees had been torn away, leaving a barren, twisted space. In the center of the clearing stood an enormous, ancient tree, its roots stretching deep into the ground, its branches reaching out like skeletal arms. Rachel gasped as she noticed something carved into the trunk of the tree, symbols ancient and unfamiliar. They glowed faintly, pulsing with a strange, otherworldly light. Before she could say anything, Chris reached out to touch the tree. The moment his hand made contact, the whispering voices grew louder, more frantic, until they drowned out everything else. Rachel screamed as the tree seemed to come alive, its roots shifting and twisting like serpents. The ground beneath them shook, and the air turned ice cold. The whispers became screams, and Rachel could swear she saw figures moving among the trees, dark, shadowy shapes that flickered in and out of view. Chris tried to pull away from the tree, but it was as if the roots had a grip on him, pulling him deeper into the earth. He screamed in terror, but his cries were swallowed by the forest. Rachel, terrified, turned and fled, stumbling through the woods, her breath ragged and her heart racing. She didn't stop until she reached the cabin, where she locked the door behind her and collapsed in fear. That night, as she lay in bed, the whispers continued, growing louder, moving closer. She could hear them in the walls, in the floors, in the very air around her. And she knew deep down that they would never leave her, because once you hear the whispers of the forest, there's no escaping them. The next morning, when the search party arrived to find them, they only found Rachel, alone. Chris had vanished without a trace, as though the forest had swallowed him whole. The only thing left behind was the same eerie tree, its glowing symbols now fading into the darkness. Rachel never spoke of that day again, but sometimes when she walks through a forest, she hears the whispers. And she knows that Chris is still out there somewhere, lost in the woods, waiting for her to join him. A story, too. It was supposed to be an adventure, a weekend hiking trip through the untouched wilderness of the Forest of Shadows. It was a forest so dense and remote that few ventured deep into its heart. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, warning against exploring its dark depths. but 2, the promise of a beautiful hike through ancient trees and the thrill of being in nature's most primal landscape was too tempting to resist. She had always loved the idea of exploring the wild, and when her best friends Liam and suggested the trip, she agreed without hesitation. The plan was simple: a 2-day hike, a little camping, and a lot of adventure. They would be back by Sunday, ready to face the busy work week. The 3 of them were experienced hikers who had hiked several trails across the country: Liam, an expert camper, and a self-proclaimed nature enthusiast who loved to get off the grid. The Forest of Shadows, though a little ominous sounding, seemed like the perfect place to escape the stresses of their daily lives. They arrived at the park entrance early in the morning. The sun was just rising and the mist hung low between the towering trees. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet, but the birds began to sing as they set off. The trail was beautiful, winding through groves of ancient oaks, tall ferns, and bubbling streams. The forest felt alive, its energy palpable as the sunlight filtered through the branches above. For the first few hours, the hike was peaceful. They made jokes, stopped for photos, and enjoyed the serenity of being far away from the noise of civilization. They passed a few small cabins along the way, remnants of the old logging days. Most had been abandoned, left to the forest to reclaim. As they continued deeper into the woods, the trees grew denser and the path became more rugged. Still, the air was fresh and clean, and the light played through the canopy like a golden haze. By late afternoon, they reached the clearing where they planned to set up camp. The area was quiet, almost unnervingly so. No rustling of animals, no distant sounds of people, just stillness. Tried to push the unease aside, but as she unpacked their gear, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. They set up the tent, made a fire, and cooked a simple dinner of canned beans and sausages. As night fell, the forest took on a darker tone. The air grew colder, and the shadows around their campfire stretched long into the trees. Liam and talked about old ghost stories they had heard in the area, stories about people who had disappeared into the forest and were never seen again. Laughed along, but there was something unsettling about their stories. As the fire crackled, she could almost feel the forest watching them. The first night passed uneventfully, with only the sounds of the wind and distant owls breaking the silence. But the next morning, things began to feel strange. Woke early to a crisp chill in the air. She unzipped the tent to find a dense fog had rolled in, shrouding the entire clearing. The trees looked like dark silhouettes against the gray haze. The forest was silent again, eerily so. No birds, no insects, just the quiet rustling of leaves in the breeze. Liam called softly, but her voice sounded too loud in the thick fog. She looked over at the campfire, still smoldering from last night. It was odd, considering the time of morning, but the fire was still glowing faintly. She frowned, feeling a growing sense of discomfort. The fog seemed to be moving, creeping in thicker as though it was alive, and the world around her seemed to close in. She walked toward the fire, shaking off the creeping sensation. That's when she noticed it, tracks fresh and unmistakable, leading from the woods toward their camp. They were large, animalistic, but unlike anything had seen before. The tracks seemed to form a pattern, an almost deliberate path. She crouched down, tracing the imprints with her fingers. They were too deep for any animal new, almost human-like, but the claws were sharp, as though they were meant to tear and rip. "Guys!" shouted, her voice rising in alarm. She ran back to the tent, shaking it hard to wake her friends. "Wake up, there's something wrong." Liam stirred first, rubbing his eyes. "What is it? It's still early. The fog is really thick this morning." "We need to get out of here," said, her heart pounding. "I found tracks, something's out there, and I don't feel right about this." Groggily emerged from the tent, rubbing his neck. "What's going on? It's just some weird animal tracks. Calm down." but wasn't convinced. There was something in the air, something ancient, something alive in the forest that didn't belong. Despite their reassurance, they agreed to pack up and leave. They quickly broke down their camp, but the strange tracks were all around them now, leading in strange, circular patterns. It was as though something was circling them, tracking their every move. As they gathered their things, a low growl sounded from the trees. It was distant but unmistakable. They froze, fear taking over their bodies. The growl grew louder, followed by a guttural, raspy voice that seemed to echo through the trees. "A lead of Nile." The voice wasn't human. It was deeper, rougher, and sounded as though it was coming from deep within the forest. The three of them turned toward the sound, and that's when they saw it. In the mist, standing at the edge of the trees, was something large, too large. Its body was hidden mostly in the fog, but the glowing eyes were unmistakable. They were red, glowing like embers in the night, and its figure was hulking, massive, and too tall to be a bear or any other animal they had seen. Panic took hold. They ran, but the forest seemed to move with them. The trees shifted, closing in, narrowing their path. It was as if the forest itself was guiding them deeper into its heart. The fog thickened and the growls became louder, more frantic. The branches seemed to claw at their arms and faces as they tried to push forward, but every step they took, the creature seemed to grow closer. Stumbled, falling to the ground, her breath ragged as the creature's growl echoed in her ears. She tried to scramble to her feet, but the creature was already there, its enormous form looming above her, its eyes glowing like burning coals. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the forest. Liam and were nowhere to be seen. Was alone in the woods now, trapped between the thick fog and the terrible creature stalking her. She could feel its breath, hot and foul, on her neck. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the creature lunged, its claws reaching out. But before it could strike, the forest shifted once more. The fog rolled back, the trees opening up to reveal a narrow, hidden path leading to a distant, sunlit clearing. The creature hesitated, as if bound by some unseen force, and in that moment ran. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, never looking back. When she reached the clearing, the creature was gone, the fog had lifted, and the air seemed almost normal again. But the woods behind her felt different, darker. It wasn't until she reached the edge of the forest that she dared to turn around. The path she had taken was gone. The forest had closed it off completely. Made it out alive, but she would never forget the eyes of the creature. And she never told anyone what really happened in the forest of shadows. But sometimes, on quiet nights, she can still hear the growl echoing in her mind. And when she closes her eyes, she sees those glowing eyes staring back at her from the trees. Story 3. Henry had always considered himself a man of the woods. He wasn't a hermit, but he loved the solitude the forest provided. For years, he lived alone in a small cabin deep in the heart of the forest, far from the nearest town. He built his home from scratch, logs he cut himself, a stone fireplace to ward off the bitter cold of winter, and a porch where he could sit and watch the world go by. The forest was his life, his solace, and he knew it like the back of his hand. He knew the tracks of every animal, the sound of every rustling leaf, and the exact way the trees whispered to him in the wind. But there was something in the woods that Henry couldn't ignore, a presence, always lurking at the edges of his awareness that made him uneasy. It was subtle at first, just a feeling that the trees were watching him, that the forest was waiting. He brushed it off, convinced it was just his imagination. After all, it was a quiet life, and the isolation sometimes made his mind wander. It all began one winter evening, as Henry sat by his fire, the wind howling outside his cabin, rattling the windows. The snow had started to fall early that year, and the landscape around his cabin was blanketed in white. He had just finished his dinner and was preparing to go to bed when a strange sound caught his attention. A tapping. Light at first, almost like a knock on wood coming from somewhere just outside the cabin. It was faint, like a distant, rhythmic thumping. At first, Henry thought it was just the wind, the sound of tree branches shifting. But as the noise continued, his instincts told him something wasn't right. He stood up and moved toward the door, listening carefully. The tapping was too deliberate, too constant. It was coming from the direction of the woods. He opened the door cautiously, the cold air biting at his skin. The night was dark, the full moon obscured by thick clouds, and the forest was silent. The snow seemed to absorb every sound. But then he saw it. In the distance, just beyond the edge of the trees, a shadow moved. Henry squinted, trying to make it out, but the figure was obscured by the darkness. It wasn't an animal, it was too tall, too humanoid. The figure stood still for a moment, its shape blending with the night. Then, just as quickly, it disappeared into the woods. Henry's heart raced, his breath coming in shallow bursts. He closed the door quickly, locking it behind him, but his mind raced. He had lived here for years, but he had never seen anything like that. His thoughts turned to the old legends the townsfolk would tell, the ones about creatures in the forest, spirits that lived beneath the roots of the ancient trees. He dismissed them all as old tales meant to scare children, but now he wasn't so sure. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind that rattled the walls felt like it was carrying a message, something dark, something ancient. He tossed and turned, unable to sleep, his eyes flicking to the window, half expecting to see that shadow once more. The next day, Henry decided to investigate. He grabbed his coat and boots, determined to find out what had been out there in the woods. As he walked into the forest, the trees loomed above him like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting into the sky. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of his boots on the snow. He reached the spot where he had seen the figure, and as he looked around, he noticed something strange. The trees here were different. The trunks were thicker, the bark darker, as if they had been here longer than any of the other trees. The snow seemed to be packed down in a perfect circle around a large, ancient oak at the center of the clearing. The roots of the tree were exposed, twisted, and knotted like the fingers of a giant hand. As Henry crouched down to examine the roots, his breath visible in the cold air. As he ran his hand over the twisted bark, he felt a strange vibration, almost like a hum coming from beneath the ground. He pulled his hand back, alarmed. There was something alive beneath the earth. He didn't want to, but something urged him to look closer. He grabbed a nearby branch and began to scrape away the snow from the base of the tree. The ground felt soft, almost as though it were shifting beneath his feet. When he dug deeper, his shovel scraped against something solid, something wooden, but unlike any wood he had ever seen before. A curiosity him, and he continued to dig. The deeper he went, the more the earth seemed to shift around him, as though the forest was resisting his every move. Finally, after what felt like hours, he uncovered a massive root. No, not a root. It was a trap. A large wooden door made from thick planks of ancient wood hidden beneath the earth. The door was sealed with rusted iron chains, the metal twisted and bent from age. The edges of the door were jagged, and the wood was covered in strange symbols, marks that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Henry's heart skipped a beat as he realized what he had uncovered, a hidden entrance buried beneath the oldest tree in the forest. He stepped back, unsure of what he had just found. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to close the door and never return, but something in the back of his mind urged him to open it to see what lay beneath. With a trembling hand, he reached for the chains and tried to pry them open. But as he touched them, the ground beneath him trembled and the door creaked. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and the sound of movement echoed from deep within the earth. A low, guttural growl rumbled from below. The ground began to shake, the trees around him groaning as if alive. Henry stumbled back, but the door jerked open with a loud screech. From the darkness beneath the door, something moved. Large clawed hands reached up from the ground, followed by a hulking form, a massive creature, its body covered in gnarled, twisted roots. Its eyes were glowing an unnatural red, and its mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth. The creature's body seemed to be made of the very forest itself, its limbs long and spindly, with bark-like skin that blended into the surrounding trees. Henry tried to run, but his legs felt like they were glued to the ground. The creature lunged toward him, its sharp claws swiping through the air. He could feel its breath, hot and foul, on his face as it drew closer. But just as it was about to reach him, the ground beneath Henry gave way. The earth shifted, and he was sucked into the hole, falling deep into the darkness below. Well, the last thing he heard was the creature's screech echoing through the forest, and then silence. Days later, a search party arrived, but all they found was Henry's cabin, empty and abandoned. The forest seemed as it always had, calm and still, as though nothing had ever happened. The clearing was undisturbed, the door hidden beneath the roots of the ancient oak covered by a fresh layer of earth and snow. But the trees, the oldest ones, still whispered in the wind. And the creature, it was still there, waiting for someone else to uncover its secret. As Henry's terrifying discovery remains buried beneath the roots, one thing is certain. The forest holds far darker secrets than anyone could imagine. The creature, ancient and waiting, lurks beneath the earth, always watching, always hungry. The whispers of the trees will continue, and the forest will claim those who dare to uncover its mysteries. If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next terrifying tale. We have plenty more eerie stories from the dark corners of the world, and you won't want to miss a single one. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on all of our latest videos, and remember, some things in the woods are best left untouched. Thanks for listening and stay safe, because the forest is always waiting and it never forgets. There's a stillness in the air today, the kind that wraps around you like linen wraps around a mummy, soft, weighty, and gently threatening. Even the city seems to walk slower. Pigeons don't bother flapping. A cat naps in the middle of the road with complete confidence no one will disturb it. You're headed to a stoneworker's courtyard at the edge of town. Ra said there's something you need to see. He didn't elaborate, he never does. That's how you ended up with beeswax in your nose last week. The courtyard is shaded, quiet. Several men are bent over blocks of limestone, carving shapes that are familiar now. Molars, incisors, canines, exaggerated, elegant, eternal. One is working on a statue of Sekhmet holding a tooth between her claws. You're greeted by a sculptor with hands like chisels and a voice like dust. He points to a half-finished relief. For the tomb of a scribe, he says. He wanted his mouth preserved in stone, said he feared silence more than death. You nod, that sounds about right. A historical fact. Egyptians often included carvings of their mouths and eyes in their tombs, not just portraits but symbols of function. To speak, to see, to taste joy in the afterlife. Some even requested inscriptions of their favorite meals just in case. An obscure tidbit: in certain high-status tombs, a small stone mouth was placed beside the head. It was believed to act as a backup, just in case your actual mouth got lost en route to the field of reeds. Historians still debate whether these carvings were magical tools or simple comfort objects. But when you're walking into eternity, a spare set of lips isn't the worst idea. It shows you how to chisel sandstone. It's slow, rhythmic, and strangely calming. You carve a crescent, maybe a tooth, maybe just a smile that forgot how to end. When you stop, your hands are dusty, your cheeks sun-warmed, and your heart oddly full. You've helped preserve someone else's bite for the next world. That's something. That evening, as the shadows lengthen and frogs begin their evening chorus, you sit on the wall outside the temple and watch people walk by. You wonder how many of them will live behind a tooth in stones. You wonder how many already have. You dream of teeth, not your own, a whole collection. Smiling, grimacing, whispering things in languages you don't quite know. When you wake, the wind is hot and twitchy, blowing grit under doorways and into pots. The kind of wind that makes sandals squeak and scrolls unravel themselves just for fun. You're back at Ra's clinic today, not for treatment, for helping. Word has gotten out that you know things. You blame the chewing powder and your ability to walk in a straight line while rinsing. Now, today's patient is a baker. His breath smells like yeast and effort. He holds his cheek like it might fall off, gestures for you to sit nearby to observe. The baker opens wide. There's swelling, a pulsing redness, a molar that looks like it's halfway to becoming a volcano. It begins with a cooling poultice, clay, pomegranate skin, and a few drops of holy oil, which he pours with theatrical precision. A historical fact: pomegranate was prized in ancient Egypt not just for its taste, but for its medicinal properties. Its rind and juice were used to treat infections, wounds, and inflamed tissues, including angry teeth. An obscure tidbit: some healers believed that whispering a patient's name into the pomegranate before applying it helped direct the remedy. You try it very softly. The baker doesn't notice. The gods might. Historians still debate whether this was medicine, magic, or clever distraction. But the baker begins to breathe more evenly. And when starts humming a chant, the tension in the room dissolves like salt in warm water. You pass tools, you fetch herbs. At one point, lets you apply a balm with a brush made of bundled reeds. Your hand trembles slightly, but the baker doesn't flinch. As afterwards, the man grips your arm and says, "My son will sleep tonight. So will I." You nod, you smile. Your heart does something quiet and warm. That night, after the last jar is sealed and the last cloth washed, hands you a reed pen and a scrap of papyrus. "Write what you remember," he says. "You'll need it." You hesitate, then you write: redness, warmth, pomegranate, relief. You don't know if it's a treatment or a poem. But it feels like both. Today you carry water. buckets of it, drawn from a shallow well with a rope that creaks like an old man telling stories no one asked for. It's not glamorous, but Ra says, if you don't understand where the water comes from, you don't understand how to clean a mouth. You assume he's being philosophical, or tired, or both. You pour the water into clay jars, one for rinsing, one for boiling, one labeled mysteriously as for regret. You don't ask. Some things are better left as mysteries, like why onions need so many designations. Once the fire is lit, begins to boil leaves, eucalyptus, sweet flag, and a shredded linen scrap soaked in fig juice. He calls it a cleansing mist. You call it steam with ambition. A historical fact. Steam therapy was used in Egyptian healing practices, especially for the head and mouth. Herb-infused vapors were believed to soften infection, calm nerves, and loosen the spirits that hide between the teeth. An obscure tidbit, certain temples featured steam chambers where patients would inhale specific blends while priests recited spells nearby. One record mentions the voice of Ra heating the breath of man. Translation: aromatherapy with divinity. You sit with your head draped under linen, breathing in the mist. It smells like forest and tea and something sharp enough to demand attention. Ra hums nearby, tapping his fingers on a bronze bowl like a slow heartbeat. As the steam rises, something inside you, maybe tension, maybe memory, begins to melt. Your mouth relaxes. Your shoulders unclench. For a moment, your thoughts are quiet. And historians still debate whether the herbs did the healing or if the quiet did. But when the mist lifts and you emerge blinking and breathless, you feel as though you've been politely scrubbed by the gods. You dry your face and hands you a small token, a clay bead shaped like a drop of water. You've graduated, he says, to beginner. You clip it onto your satchel. It swings with each step as you walk home, feeling cleansed, confused, and faintly eucalyptus-scented. You'll never look at a steaming pot the same way again. There's a ceremony tonight, not for healing but for storytelling. The scribes are hosting a gathering beneath the stars, and somehow you've been invited. You arrive just after dusk. Lanterns hang from wooden beams like sleepy fireflies. Mats and cushions form lazy circles on the temple floor. Bowls of dates and roasted chickpeas are passed around like sacred offerings. Though the air smells of myrrh, ink, and anticipation. The first story is told by a woman with a voice like gravel softened by honey. She speaks of a prince whose mouth grew so foul that even crocodiles avoided his boat. The cure: a kiss from a temple cat, highly suspect, undeniably entertaining. Then a boy recites a poem about a tooth that ran away. It danced across the Nile, evaded a hawk, and finally settled on a moonbeam. Everyone claps. Someone cries, you suspect it's the onions again. Is historical fact. Oral storytelling was central to Egyptian life. Healers often passed down medical knowledge through parables, myths, and cautionary tales, blurring the line between entertainment and education. An obscure tidbit: one famous healing myth involved Thoth, god of wisdom, disguising himself as a dentist to cure Horace's aching mouth using a potion made from moonlight and mashed radish. It's been debated whether this story was meant as satire or sincere health advice. While you're asked to tell a story, you panic slightly. Then you remember the baker, his cheek, his sigh of relief, his son. You stand, you speak softly, hands still, breath slow. You tell them what it looked like: redness blooming, steam rising, the whispered name into the pomegranate peel. You leave out the awkward brushing. Mostly. When you finish, no one claps, they just nod. The way Egyptians do when something hits that quiet note of truths. Historians still debate whether non-scribes were encouraged to tell stories in sacred settings. Tonight, at least, they were. Later, a scribe hands you a scrap of papyrus. Write it down, he says, the story of the worm. You do, not because you need to remember, but because someone else will. And when their teeth ache, they'll want to believe it ends well. You're at the river again, watching a heron stand completely still, pretending not to be watching you. It's a game now, this silent standoff. Neither of you wants to blink first. You win, barely. This morning's errand comes from the midwife. She wants a specific kind of root harvested, the crooked one, with bitter skin and a nose for abscesses. You didn't ask questions, you just nodded and grabbed a basket. So here you are, knee-deep in reeds, poking the ground like a very uncertain archaeologist, looking for something vaguely unpleasant to touch. Eventually you find it. It smells like sadness and soup. Will be thrilled. As you return to town, you pass by the funeral quarter. Men are carving a fresh coffin. A woman wails nearby rhythmically, like a song that's forgotten its lyrics but remembers the key. You stop briefly at the house of embalmers, not for a tour, but because one of them owes Ra a jar of oil. He greets you with red hands and tired eyes. Still working on the jaw, he mutters. You hope he means the deceased. A historical fact. Embalmers often had detailed knowledge of anatomy, including teeth. Some mummies have been found with carefully stuffed mouths, linen, resin, and sometimes amulets, to ensure the soul could speak in the next world, or chew possibly. An obscure tidbit, one preserved jawbone was discovered with a cavity stuffed not with resin, but with linen dipped in beer and fig juice. A final attempt at comfort, a joke. No one knows. Historians still debate whether dental fillings in mummies were done before death or after. Either way, it shows a remarkable dedication to making sure no one entered eternity with a toothache. You collect the oil and head back, basket heavy, mouth dry, thoughts foggy. As at home, she takes the root, sniffs once, nods approvingly, and drops it into a steaming pot beside a clay doll. For a child whose teeth are coming too early, she explains. Sometimes the mouth forgets to wait for the heart. You sit in her courtyard, sipping water that tastes faintly of tamarind. And for the 100th time, you wonder how something as small as a tooth can carry so much weight. The moon is high tonight, and someone in the distance is singing badly but with heart. You're lying on your back in Ra's courtyard, staring up at the stars and trying to name them with your own private names. That one crooked tooth, the one next to it molten wax, that cluster over there, definitely the gods are guessing again. Joins you with 2 cups of warm barley drink. He sits beside you with a sigh that sounds like it's been aging in a barrel. "Oh, you've stayed longer than most," he says. "Oh, you shrug, I had good reasons." "Pain is a loyal teacher," he says, "but you've listened long enough." He pulls something from the folds of his robe, a reed scroll tied with blue thread. "I made you your first script," he says. "Beginner formulas, prayers, a few questionable jokes." Is historical fact. Novice healers often began with a personal scroll, part manual, part journal. They were handwritten, inked with blessings, and filled with the trial and error of someone who cared enough to try. As obscure tidbit, the thread color often signified a specialty. Blue meant healing of the breath and voice. Red was for bones, green was for love potions. Yellow, only the gods knew and they weren't telling. Historians still debate how formal these apprentice texts were. But nearly every great healer left behind scribbled formulas that suggest more experimentation than divine inspiration. You unroll the scroll and read the first line aloud. "When the worm of grief gnaws behind the eye, begin with onion, not fires." Oh, you smile, you don't understand it yet, but it feels right. Later, you fall asleep beneath a tree that smells of camphor and old promises. The scroll resting across your chest like a cat that's finally decided to trust you. Now the stars drift overhead, the air cools. And somewhere in a very old part of the city, someone begins to grind herbs for a mouth they've never seen, but already believe they can save. The scroll is now part of your morning ritual. You wake, stretch, rinse your mouth with warm water, and read one line aloud quietly as if you're reciting to the plants. Which you might be. Some of them seem to nod. Today's line reads, "If the jaw is clenched, speak nothing, boil basil instead." You're not entirely sure if it's metaphor or recipe. You boil basil anyway. Ra meets you in the marketplace, where a small crowd has gathered around a man selling miracle reeds guaranteed to remove tooth demons and attract better conversations. You watch as he dramatically flosses between 2 papyrus leaves and declares himself free of suffering. The crowd claps politely. Now you and don't interrupt. Sometimes belief is the medicine. Later, you follow him to a small, quiet home in the weaver's quarter. Inside, an old woman lies on a cot, her face drawn, her breath shallow. Her daughter explains in whispers she hasn't eaten in days, not for lack of hunger. Her mouth just refuses. Kneels beside her, gently lifts her chin. She opens her mouth with the fragile reluctance of a paper door in wind. Her tongue is cracked, her gums pale, her teeth, what remain of them, are stained from decades of effort. You watch as places a warm cloth across her cheeks. Then he prepares a rinse, wine steeped with fig bark and honey, nothing sharp, nothing bitter. A historical fact. Egyptians treated oral decline in elders with extreme gentleness. Liquids, warm poultices, soft herbs. There was a belief that the mouth, once worn, had already earned its rest. A obscure tidbit. In some cases, elders were gifted mouth charms carved from wood or bone, meant to be held during meals even if eating wasn't possible, so they could still receive the act of nourishment in spirit. And historians still debate whether these practices were spiritual gestures or symbolic care. But the look in the daughter's eyes when her mother sips and sighs, that's not metaphor, that's relief. You help clean the bowls, wipe the woman's lips, tuck a linen pillow beneath her neck. And as you leave, the daughter places a clay bead in your palm. To remember, she says, that she still tasted sweetness today. You press it to your chest just once, then tuck it in the pouch beside your scroll. Another story added, another mouth honored. The rain comes in strange, soft bursts, just enough to startle dust, not enough to satisfy the ground. The Nile is restless, tugging at its own edges like a child too big for its cradle. You spend the morning inside, cleaning instruments with wine and sand. Ra insists on it. A clean tool, he says, reminds the mouth it is worth the effort. Your task today is to prepare chewing bundles for children, reed fibers dipped in mint oil and rolled in powdered carob. The taste is sweet, the texture gentle. Let their first memory of care be kindness, he says. They'll need it later. Is historical fact. Children in ancient Egypt were taught oral care from a young age, often with flavored twigs and sweetened herbs. The earliest dental habits were more ritual than routine, passed down like lullabies. An obscure tidbit. One tomb painting shows a child offering their parent a twig with the caption, "To stop the weeping in your jaw." Whether literal or symbolic, it's one of the oldest depictions of empathy in dental history. As you finish wrapping the bundles in thin strips of palm, a boy arrives with his older sister. He's quiet, clutching his cheek, eyes wide with that unmistakable expression. Betrayal by molar. Ra welcomes him like a visiting prince. He jokes gently, shows him the tools, lets him pick his favorite oil, lavender in this case. You wouldn't have guessed. The boy lies still as applies the balm, holding his sister's hand the entire time. When it's done, the boy sits up blinking. His mouth is open, but for the first time not in pain. I hands him one of your bundles. Chew this when you're sad and when you're brave, which you already are. The boy nods solemnly and takes it like a sacred object. Historians still debate whether such gestures were ceremonial or just human decency. But standing there, watching him walk out a little taller, you know it doesn't matter. The care was real, the relief was real. And somewhere inside that tiny mouth, a story of healing has begun. The city is louder than usual this morning. People are shouting about bread prices. A goat has apparently escaped and is protesting with flair, and someone is playing a drum that was clearly not meant for mourning. But inside Ra's clinic, it's quiet. a kind of hush that belongs to sacred places and overripe fruit stalls, soft, sweet, a little heavy. He's preparing a special blend today, one reserved for weddings. Yes, weddings. Apparently, the mouth must be cleansed not just for health but for vows. You don't want to promise forever with sour breath, he says, completely straight-faced. You help him crush rose petals into oil, mix it with cinnamon bark and lime peel, and strain it through a cloth so fine it could pass for the wing of a very discerning moth. A historical fact, pre-wedding oral rituals were common in Egyptian ceremonies. Couples often received shared chew bundles and rinses as part of their union, a symbolic alignment of breath, voice, and intention. A obscure tidbit, one regional tradition involved both partners biting opposite ends of a sweet root, chewing until they met in the middle. It was said the union would last as long as the sweetness remained, which, depending on the root, was about 4 minutes. Historians still debate whether these traditions were religious, romantic, or just hygiene disguised as ritual. Either way, the couple who arrives later that day seems both nervous and delighted. They sit across from each other, knees almost touching, and sip the rose rinse from matching cups. Ra mutters something about joining breath and balance. You think he just enjoys sounding wise, but the mood holds. The groom touches his cheek. No sting, he says, surprised. The bride smiles. I can actually taste again. She leans in. This bodes well. You prepare 2 bundles of cinnamon bark tied with linen thread, gifts from the clinic. The couple thanks you. The bride presses your hand. Bless the one who keeps our words clean, she says. That night you light a small lamp in your room, not for vision, just for warmth. You sit with your scroll, add a new line. For love, use cinnamon. For truth, rinse first. It's almost time to leave. You feel it. In the way people glance at you now with recognition instead of curiosity. In the way Ra pauses longer between instructions, as though letting the words stretch into memory. You're not being pushed out, far from it. But the story is rounding itself off like a well-carved molar. This morning, you're tasked with something final, preparing a burial set. Not for a nobleman, not for a priest. For a stonecutter who spent his life carving temple floors and chewing date pits. He passed quietly in the night. His family wants him prepared as someone who worked with his hands and never once cursed his molars. A tall request. Ra shows you how to make the bundle. A linen wrap, 1 chew stick dipped in peppermint, 1 vial of rinse, 1 charm shaped like a tooth, and a small note with the phrase, "Let my words pass clean into the West." A historical fact. Egyptians often placed oral care tools in tombs, chew sticks, powders, even tongue scrapers. A clean mouth was seen as a respectful offering to Osiris and a necessary preparation for eternal speech. A obscure tidbit, one tomb featured a small bronze toothbrush and a line of text declaring, "May my tongue be ready to answer Mot." Essentially, I brushed for Judgment Day. Historians still debate whether these kits were truly functional or purely symbolic. But the families who left them clearly believed words mattered, even after the heartbeat stopped. The city doesn't stop just because your journey is winding down. In fact, it seems more alive than ever. Children laugh louder, goats chew bolder, and merchants shout like they're auditioning for the role of Voice of Ra. You take the long way to the clinic today, weaving through streets you haven't visited in days. A woman offers you roasted chickpeas. A man tries to sell you a clay figurine shaped like a tooth with wings. You don't buy it, but you admire the confidence. Ra is already busy when you arrive, humming to himself as he stirs a jar of what looks like melted tar. Last lessons, he says without looking up. You ready? You nod because that's what you do at the end of something important, even if you're not entirely sure what you're agreeing to. He hands you the jar and a thin reed brush. For sealing, he says, cracks, wounds, promises. You spend the morning applying the paste to a series of tiny clay mouth models. Each one is slightly different. One has a chipped incisor, another a wide grin, another no teeth at all, just a silent O. You seal each one with care. A historical fact. Ancient Egyptian healers sometimes created small clay mouth effigies, especially during rituals meant to symbolically close pain. The act of sealing cracks with resin or tar represented mending what could not be physically restored. As obscure tidbit, these mini-mouths were often buried in the corners of homes or clinics, so the suffering would not return. Some had tiny inscriptions like "Let silence sleep" or "Pain goes west." Historians still debate whether this practice was widespread or a local tradition, but the surviving examples show astonishing detail and surprisingly expressive molars. As after the last model is sealed, places your hand over your chest. And now, he says, close your own. You nod again, this time slower. That evening, you light a small lamp beside your sleeping mat and unwrap the scroll one last time. You add a new line. To heal is to listen. To leave is not to forget. You don't write anything else. The rest is full. Dawn doesn't wait. It pulls itself over the horizon like a patient cat, slow and certain, indifferent to your plans. Today is your last in the city. You've packed little your scroll, your chew stick, your small charms, the bead of water, the carved tooth, the linen pouch with mulberry blend, all quiet reminders that healing isn't always loud. You stop first at the market. The vendors wave, some nod, a few shout jokes. One hands you a ripe fig and says, "For your last bite, make it count." You stop by the temple of the priestess who first showed you the scrolls, hands you a fresh reed pen. "For wherever you go," she says, "even if it's just in circles." A historical fact. Healers who left their training often continued their practice wherever they settled, villages, caravans, even aboard trading ships. Oral care was one of the few services always in demand. An obscure tidbit. One traveler's log from the western oases mentions a stranger with mint hands who cured a merchant's jaw using nothing but honey, spit, and poetry. Whether it was you or someone like you isn't clear. Historians still debate whether such healers were celebrated or merely tolerated, but records show they were rarely forgotten. You visit Ra last. He's waiting in the courtyard with a basket of dried herbs, a sharp smile, and wet eyes he won't acknowledge. You'll forget the names, he says. That's fine, just remember how people look when the pain lifts. You hugs him awkwardly, carefully, completely. He presses something into your hand, a chew stick carved with your name or something close. The hieroglyph might mean quiet mouth or talks too much. It's fitting either way. You walk to the edge of town, sandals brushing the dust, the breeze nudging your back like a parent who isn't quite ready to say goodbye. You don't look back. Not because you're brave, but because if you do, you might stay. You walk with the procession to the tomb site. It's modest, ringed with acacia trees. As the body is placed inside, the items you prepared are tucked beside him. You whisper the note aloud once. You stay a moment after the others leave. The wind is dry but soft. You place your fingers gently on the stone. Thank you, you say, for chewing bravely. Then you return to the city, scroll tucked under your arm, dust in your sandals, and something quiet in your chest. Not pains, not anymore. Just a kind of echo, a memory of mouths opened not in suffering, but in song. You follow the river now, not out of necessity, but because it feels like the only proper road. Its slow current whispers beside you, soft, gravelly, full of old jokes and even older secrets. Somewhere a frog croaks like it's laughing at a memory you haven't reached yet. Your feet find their rhythm. Sandal, sandal, stone, the scroll sways in its wrap. The chew stick bumps against your side. Every few minutes you run your thumb over the bead of water, it helps. You stop at a tiny village where the smell of bread clings to everything. A woman watches you with suspicion until you smile. Then she nods and motions you toward the shade. Her son sits nearby, whimpering softly, a swollen cheek pressed against his hand. You recognize the look. You sit beside him, say nothing at first, just hand him your pouch, let him choose. He picks the softest blend, fig bark and honey, a good choice. Wise beyond his years or just tired. You apply it gently, he flinches once, then sighs deep, like someone unlocking a window in his own face. Historical fact: roving healers, often unnamed in temple records, were a staple of rural Egyptian life. They carried herbs in cloth, tools in baskets, and stories in their teeth. An obscure tidbit: in certain villages, a healer's arrival was marked by children offering salt and limes, not payment but a symbolic request. Preserve what's inside me. Historians still debate whether these healers had any official training, or just the trust of mouths in pain. As after the treatment, the boy hands you a piece of dried date. You accept it like an offering. His mother touches your wrist, says something that might mean thank you or don't vanish. Maybe both. You walk on, wind behind you, river beside you, memory inside you. Now, you're not a priest, you're not a doctor. Now, you're just someone who knows where the pain goes and how to meet it with something soft. The path narrows, palm trees give way to scrub, then open fields. The Nile drifts further away, but its sound stays with you like a hum you can't shake. As in a roadside shelter, you meet a merchant with a missing tooth and a laugh like a cracked drum. He offers you wine, bread, and a story. You accept all three. He tells you of a time he bit into a golden fig and broke 2 molars. He says it with pride, like it was worth it. You nod, maybe it was. You share a trick for rinsing with warm tamarind. He's skeptical but promises to try. Can't hurt more than chewing gold, he says. A historical fact: tamarind pulp was used in some parts of ancient Egypt as a rinse or poultice for sore mouths. Its sourness was thought to draw out infection and wake the gums. An obscure tidbit: in one curious ritual, tamarind was also placed under the tongue during funerals to prevent the soul from speaking out of turn to the gods. Essentially, a spiritual mute button. And historians still debate whether this was taken literally or if it was a metaphor for dignity. Either way, the afterlife was not a place for unsolicited commentary. You part ways with the merchant and continue walking, fields turning to open sand. The scroll at your side is heavier now, not from ink, but from what it holds. You think of the clay mouths, the old woman and her daughter, the boy with the chew bundle, the prince who brushed before his vows. You think of your own pain, once a storm, now a quiet echo. There's a hill up ahead, small, insignificant, you climb it anyway. As at the top, the wind presses against you, as if trying to carry you forward. Now you stand still, close your eyes, and say one word aloud. A name not yours, but one of theirs, one of the many mouths you've met. It adrifts, and then it's gone. But something stays. You arrive at a quiet bend in the road, far from the temple walls and the noise of waking cities. The wind has grown gentler, the air dry but calm, like even the desert has decided to speak a little more softly today. You sit beneath a lone tree, its branches warped by time and wind, leaves flickering like old papyrus. You take out your scroll, your pen, your silence. And you begin to write. No, not formulas, not recipes. Just names. Of people, of mouths, of voices. Each one carried something, a whisper, a wince, a song half sung. You didn't fix all of them, but you listened. You learned the shape of their pain, you held it and when possible softened it. A historical fact: in some desert communities, healers kept what were called scrolls of breath, records not of symptoms or ingredients but of moments. Things said, things unsaid. They believed memory itself could be medicinal. An obscure tidbit: one preserved scroll ends with the line, "If I speak your name, you are still becoming." No one knows who wrote it, but it's in dozens of fragments, over centuries. And historians still debate if these were personal journals, oral histories, or prayers in disguise. But in the hush of this open place, it feels like all three. You close the scroll, tied it with the same thread Ra gave you, not because the story is over, but because it's full. You stand, you look back just once, at the river winding far off in the distance. The city just a smear of warmth and time. You breathe in through your nose, exhale slow through your mouth. No ache, no heat, just the shape of peace. You begin to walk, not away from healings, but toward whatever comes next. And if someone along the path asks, "Who taught you this?" You'll smile, press your palm gently to your chest, and answer, "A man with too many onions, a scroll that never ends, and a very sharp reed." And now, dear listener, let it all fade. Let the dust settle back into the roads. Let the reed mats roll themselves up. Let the Nile soften its voice until it's just the faintest echo behind your thoughts. You're not in ancient Egypt anymore, not entirely. But your breath is slow, your jaw is still. Your body remembers what it feels like to be tended to, not with urgency but with patience. Not to be fixed but to be seen. The tools are put away. The lanterns dim. Somewhere in a place beyond sound, a scroll is being rolled shut. And inside it are all the tiny moments that didn't need to be big to be sacred. A child offering a stick of mint. A healer humming over clay bowls. A tooth that finally stops hurting. No more incantations tonight. No more roots to grind, no more rituals to recite. Just sleep now. So soft as linen. So still as resin. So quiet as breath between heartbeats. Let your teeth rest. Let your voice go silent. Let your thoughts fold in on themselves like petals after dusk. You've walked far, you've carried so many stories. Now let the dark carry you. And if dreams come, and they might, may they be full of rivers, soft laughter, and someone in the distance, grinding herbs just for you. Good night, from Whispers of History. Until next time.